Ukraine says it's repelled a major Russian tank assault, a sign that summer fighting is now underway, and Germany has dropped its biggest hint that its bunker-busting Taurus cruise missiles will soon enter the fray. Kharkiv again. My name is Jerome. I'm the defence editor at the Sun newspaper, and this is Frontline, your weekly roundup of the most important news from the war in Ukraine. We're starting with reports from Ukraine that they have repelled a major armoured assault in Zaporizhia Oblast in the last 24 hours. Ukrainian military officials say some 320 Russian soldiers involved with 40 armoured vehicles, 30 tanks and about 10 armoured personnel carriers as well. This took place across a number of small settlements, Stepove, Lobkove, in the area east of what used to be the bulge in the dam in the Dnipro River south of Zaporizhia city. It's an area where Russian forces have been launching a number of offensives over recent weeks and months. It's significant because of the scale of it, because we had seen over the autumn and the winter many Russian forces adopting small unit tactics instead of launching these large armoured assaults, instead using small groups of individuals, 4 or 5 or 6 infantry soldiers probing positions, and that was to try and make them smaller, less appealing targets for the Ukrainian drones. This is a sort of return in some ways to the Russian tactics of earlier years in the conflict. We have seen these large assaults as well, particularly in the sort of southeastern fronts around Kharkiv and Pokrovsk. Ukraine says it was able to repel it, principally with drones and artillery. That has been the nature of this conflict. When forces mass, if they are discovered, that is how they tend to be destroyed. And Ukrainian officials suggesting that Russia lost 29 vehicles and some 140 troops as a result of this failed assault. But what we know of Russia is that they will continue more assaults like that. They will continue to probe and push in those directions. And indeed, they have been making advances around Toretsk, around Pokrovsk, and around Velika Novosilka, further to the east in the Donetsk, southeastern Donetsk part of the front line, so east of those attacks in Zaporizhia. Russia also continues to make gains in Kursk Oblast, in Russian Kursk Oblast, where it has been forcing Ukraine's forces out of Russian soil. You remember at the peak of that invasion in August, when Ukraine launched a surprise invasion, they captured hundreds of square kilometers. When we last updated you, Ukraine still held about 60. Now, according to the Deep State app, which tracks who holds what, Ukraine only holds about 30 square kilometers of Russian territory, so they are continuing to retreat from those positions. Outside Ukraine, Germany's incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz has dropped the strongest signal yet that he is willing, and that Berlin may yet be willing, to deliver its Taurus bunker-busting cruise missiles. Now, this would be huge news for Ukraine. Taurus missiles are on one level very similar to the British Storm Shadow missiles, the French Scalp cruise missiles that have already been donated and indeed are already in use. The real difference between Taurus and Storm Shadow and Scalp is that Taurus has a different, more sophisticated type of fuse, the Mephisto fuse. And we know from conversations between German military officials that were intercepted, hacked, if you like, and leaked by Russia, that this Taurus missile could pose a real threat to Russia's Kerch Bridge. That is the bridge linking mainland Russia to the eastern tip of occupied Crimea that Ukraine has targeted, has tried, but so far failed to destroy. And the significance of this Mephisto fuse is it can be programmed, or it can detect where to explode. So, for example, whilst a Storm Shadow missile, or a Scalp, which is its French equivalent, would be likely to blow straight through the bridge or explode on its surface, perhaps the Taurus might be able to do serious damage to the structure of the bridge. Now, both of them are advertised as bunker-busting stealth cruise missiles. They can both fly very low to the ground on pre-programmed routes and then rise up into the sky, high into the sky before they reach their target, and drop down almost or vertically in order to do the most damage, in order to penetrate deep into the ground to hit hardened targets and underground bunkers. Storm Shadow and Scalp both made a significant difference when they first arrived. We saw extraordinary scenes of the Storm Shadows destroying Russia's naval headquarters in occupied Sebastopol. They were used to destroy a Russian submarine and a warship in dry dock. They continue to be used. Ukraine has requested more of them, bringing Taurus in. If Merz can persuade the German government when he leads it to donate Taurus, and that would give Ukraine two things: potentially a longer range, new capability, and crucially just more availability of a very valuable weapon. Now, why has Friedrich Merz said this? Well, he said this in response to the strikes in Sumy, a double tap Iskander missile strike by Russia on the northeastern city of Sumy, where at least 34 people were killed and 117 people injured, including 5 children. Russia claimed it was targeting a military gathering. Indeed, it is claimed, but offered no evidence, that a NATO general was among the dead. Merz described it as a serious war crime. President Zelensky described the Russians behind it as deranged scum. It was a very significant strike, not just because of its high death toll, but also because of that particularly callous approach of sending one missile in and then another that targets the first responders. Sumy significant because it is the town closest to Kursk, Russian Kursk, where Ukraine's forces are fighting that rearguard action. And all of this comes as the clock ticks down on that fragile 30-day ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia, in which they agreed to halt attacks on energy infrastructure. Now, there's a bit of debate or disagreement, I should say, between Russia and Ukraine about when this ceasefire came into force and therefore when it expires. According to the Russians, it has already ended because they claim that the 30-day ceasefire came into effect on March 18th. The Ukrainians say it came into effect a week later on March 25th. Either way, it's either already expired or it's going to expire imminently. It's a reminder that Donald Trump's US-led efforts to try and broker a ceasefire to bring this war to an end are faltering. Diplomatic efforts continue, talks are continuing, but actually what we've seen from Moscow is no real appetite to end this conflict quickly. As ever, if you do have any questions, please ask them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can next time, either on the show or I'll get into the comments myself and answer them there. We're going to try and get through 4 today. Question number 1. Why do we, Frontline, focus on land movements, on who takes territory, rather than on casualties? We talk about physical gains perhaps more than we talk about human losses, because physical gains are easier to verify accurately. There are a whole range of people, open source intelligence analysts, who look at open source videos, satellite imagery to ascertain who controls what. It's much harder to give you accurate or even estimates of human losses, and that's because both sides try very hard to conceal their losses. But nonetheless, authoritative sources, including NATO Secretary General, have suggested that more than 1 million people have been killed or wounded in this conflict. Very broadly speaking, that's around 250,000 Ukrainians, likely higher now, 750,000 Russians. The reason for that disparity is because primarily the Russians have been on the offensive, and attacking is historically more deadly and dangerous for the soldiers involved. Question number 2. How can there be a peace without security guarantees? I'm not sure if this was really a rhetorical question or one you wanted answering, but I think it's a very good question. Fundamentally, Ukraine's position is there can be no lasting peace without security guarantees, because if there are no guarantees, if there's no penalty or no jeopardy for Russia not to launch another invasion later on, then there's no reason to believe they won't do that. That's what Russia invaded in 2014. There have been many failed efforts to halt the war since then, and it has failed to stop it all starting over again. It failed to stop it happening in 2022 when we saw the full-scale invasion. Russia wants to agree a peace without security guarantees, clearly because they want to leave that option open. Russia has signalled that it wants Ukraine to demilitarise, in effect to become neutral. Ukraine has said that is absolutely a red line. Zelensky said he will not shrink the size of the army, because the last thing he wants, the last thing Ukraine wants, is to leave themselves vulnerable to being overrun by Russia in the future. In fact, they want exactly the opposite. They want security guarantees. Fundamentally, they want NATO membership, so that any second invasion after a peace by Russia would be met by an Article 5 response. Question number 3 was how many Brits were killed in the Iskander attack. I'm taking that to be a question about the strike on Sumy, and I'm taking it to be a reference to the unfounded Russian claims that there was a NATO general killed in that attack. We have no evidence thus far that there were any NATO soldiers killed in that attack, let alone any Brits. If that changes, we will let you know, but as of now, we have no evidence of that. Final question, why doesn't Ukraine let soldiers from other countries defend their land? This is a reference to the fact that Russia is using North Korean soldiers, and of course, indeed, the fact that President Zelensky says there are Chinese soldiers fighting in Ukraine. And we're going to talk about the Chinese presence in Ukraine in our members-only video next. But to answer that question, why doesn't Ukraine let soldiers from other countries fight for them? Well, they do. President Zelensky urged volunteers from all around the world to come and join his armed forces in the wake of Russia's invasion some 3 years ago. And hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers have answered that call from countries as far away as Colombia, or right across Europe. We've met and spoken to volunteers from Britain, from America, from many European nations, Australia as well. The difference is they're volunteers. They are not they're not representatives, they're not soldiers from third countries. There are troops from other countries in Ukraine. There are troops protecting embassies. There have been troops providing training, troops providing advice, but there are not sort of uniformed soldiers representing their state actively fighting against Russia, and that is because countries from those states, certainly from NATO states, do not want this to escalate into a third world war, into a conflict, a direct conflict between NATO and Russia. As ever, if you've got those questions, please do ask them in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer them next time. We're in a Ukrainian armoured vehicle, and we're heading towards the Russian border.